All right, now we can get started. All right. So this is probably a little different than some of the lectures I think you all are probably used to. I'm usually the guy who's talking about equations of equilibrium, and I keep saying I don't like calculus, and then I figure out ways to throw as much calculus as I can into my classes, right? You know how that goes. That's not the case with this one. The purpose of what I'm going to be talking to you all about today is to try and tie up some of the loose ends, I guess I would say, in our curriculum when it comes to an engineering project. And what I mean by that is, let's take something like the development of a hotel. Like we're building a new hotel. If we start splitting up the different civil engineering aspects of that, we got structures folks who can design the frame and the building. We got geotech folks who can design the foundation. We got H&H folks that can do all the runoff calcs and ensure all the water's retained. We got transportation folks who can handle the traffic. Sounds good, right? But there's a little more going on, and that's sort of the big picture. The idea of taking, some tract of land and turning it into a hotel. And it's not as simple as just, put the hotel and there you go. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be assessed. How do you lay out a parking lot? How do you deal with pedestrian access? How do you deal with zoning requirements and land use controls? All that stuff. So what I want to talk about today are some concepts in land development that are important that need to be addressed. They're nothing technically complex, but some stuff that's worth mentioning. So I've got a short video I want to show you. It's a senior design project at Virginia Tech in the area of land development, and they're going to talk about just some of the aspects just to sort of get our brains thinking about this. We're going to talk a little bit about site planning, some land use controls, the monster that is parking. It is a site planner's nightmare, and pedestrian access, and then we're going to go through an example exercise, and just to give you kind of an idea of what's going on. Now this is a video for later, going through some different software stuff. We're not going to look at this video for later. It's like an hour long, but I wanted to at least provide it so you all can watch it on your own if you're interested. All right, so let's go into this introductory video, and I'll sort of shut up and we'll just watch this. Let's see.
All right, well, good morning, everybody. We're the team for Bowler, and I'm Dan Bundy.
I'm Ziad Shalaby.
Okay, hold on. All right, let's see something. I probably need to change the playback speakers. Oh, that's the wrong speakers. There we go. It was trying to replay through my little microphone. All right, let's go ahead and press play.
All right, well, good morning, everybody. We're the team for Bowler, and I'm Dan Bundy.
I'm Ziad Shalaby.
That's the name, right? I'm Calvin Jansen.
And we also are going by the team name of Diamond Design. So the site that we have given to us was a 6-acre site up in Prince William County. It was zoned for general business, so it was by right use for all of the structures that we hope to put onto the site. It was located next to a couple of highway corridors, and here were some of the things that we were hoping to put on the site: a hotel, a convention center, and a bank. Whenever we were designing, we looked at 3 key perspectives that we were intending to design for. We looked as the owner, the way to make revenue, as an engineer trying to be feasible and safe for everybody. And we also looked at it objectively as if we were the end user, trying to make it pleasant for anybody who might have to look at it or drive through our site.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about a little bit of the existing conditions. To orient yourself at the site, right here you've got Old Bridge Road, Pennsylvania Parkway, and a small connector street called Troop Street. So as you can see right now, the area is starting out mostly wooded, and the site property line is right here, which is pre-existing development. In terms of utilities, there's a water line running right up here, and a sewer line that actually came from these developments running right here. So our initial layout options were to bring some kind of street in from here or from here and have a hotel with the bank, as we said. But the issue issue became that the parking was just way too much. We ended up with about 400 spots necessary, which, as you can see from the 6-acre site, 400 parking spots is going to take up the majority of the site. So, to kind of mitigate that problem, what we ended up doing is structured parking. And so we're going to take a look at it from this layout. It makes it a little bit easier to see. So, right here we've got the hotel. We have it kind of connects into the structured parking with our the lobby and the pull-in area here. And then we also have the bank. Now, because we did the structured parking, this did cost quite a substantial amount more, but the fee, or the, I guess, return on that is that we ended up with a lot more space, meaning that we could put this 4,000 square foot restaurant, and that's going to allow for more revenue to offset the cost of the parking deck. And that's pretty much the main reasons that we've chosen this layout.
The site road, we decided it should run from Old Bridge to Troop Street. The reason we did that, on Old Bridge, you can't cross the median, so you have a right in, right out. That's really inconvenient for people who want to access the site. So we connected it through Troop Street so people would have alternate term means of access. The only problem was this, that if you see here, there's a large amount of content that needs to be removed to make the road usable, but some things have to be done to make things easily accessible. Also, our grading, the max grading on the site was 33%. We ran into some problems on the site. If you see the red lines here and here, those are retaining walls. At those areas, we cannot meet 33%, so we have to work more to preserve the grading. Also, we had to design for ADA accessibility. As ADA accessibility, there has to be at least 2%. Also, our site has a lot of ADA because of the substantial amount of parking it had.
Closely tied to the grading is the stormwater management. This is our existing site, and as you can see, it has 3 watersheds. Doing our calculations for those, using the rational method, we found that the runoff flow pre-development was about 9 cubic feet per second, while the volume was about 4,500 cubic feet. So, when we went to design our site, we actually decided to go with 4 areas, watersheds. The first one is the hotel and the structured parking. And the second, third, and fourth are up in the northeast area. And those include the parking lot, the restaurant, and the bank. That amounted to about 3 times more flow than the pre-development and about 50% more volume. So how are we going to deal with that? Well, that's where our storm management design came in. So this first area, we had it all run off to the west here, where we used a best management practice infiltration swale, and we used that for storage capacity. 40% of the swale could hold water in it. It was 8 feet deep by 5 feet wide. And as you can see, it had much more capacity than the runoff flow, and that was because things like sediment can get in those, and then that will lose capacity, and so this gives us plenty of room for those sort of things that can happen. As for the rest of the site, areas 2, 3, and 4, we decided to use a stormwater management system, a pipe network, and it all flows up here. As you saw in the grading, the site all kind of flows up to this northeast corner, and we used pipes to catch that. And it ended up that we needed about 2350 cubic feet, and we met that with a square box-like detention basin, 20 by 20 by 6. And just to go over the pipe network, we had ended up having 12 inlets, mostly 15-inch reinforced concrete pipe, but a few of these feed pipes didn't require that much, they only needed 12-inch.
Because our site is like a little larger than 6 acres, we needed more than silt pits to help treat the erosion and sediment control. So you can see here, here, and here, we have sediment traps. Sediment traps are good to areas up to 3 acres, and the largest area we have going to one is 2.68. We have diversion bank that direct all the excess runoff there to our sediment traps. And also, this sediment trap is really convenient because that is where our underground storage container is going. So we already have a hole dug, so we can just plop it in and fill it in. Our phase 2 erosion sediment control goes and protects what Thomas just talked about. It protects our storm sewer. If that was left unprotected, it would get clogged up and filled. It would be an unnecessary expense to the owner. Also, we have sediment traps surrounding our B&P, not sediment trap, wow. Sediment fence surrounding our B&P. This prevents it from getting excess sediment and being unusable when it's actually meant to be used.
The next thing we're going to do on our site is bring in water lines. So actually there was 2 existing water lines. One of them was right up here. There's also one on Troop Street that was relatively new. So we decided to go with a loop structure. And the reason behind this is to get adequate pressure of minimum of 20 psi, as well as the fire flow, which is actually what dictates the size of the pipe. And our fire flow was calculated to be about 2,500 gallons per minute. As you can see, there are service lines tying off the mains into each building that was sized respectively for the needs of the building. And we also have 2 hydrants on the site, one here and one here. Now the requirements only actually say that we need 1 hydrant, however we put 2 to make it more accessible in an emergency situation.
So for our sanitary sewer, we just decided to make a complete straight cut in to try and minimize the length of the pipe. I think we ended up with about 380 in length with all these connections. They were generally a little bit deeper than any of the rest of our pipes, which is common for a sanitary sewer in order to stay within regulations underneath a water line. These are connecting into the existing sanitary sewer that ran to the east of our site. And we calculated, even though there's 300 rooms in the hotel, we could still use an 8-inch pipe for the entire system.
And finally, and possibly most importantly, is the cost estimate. Now, as you see here, the highest costs in terms of development are earthwork and paving. This is expected in most development projects, especially already because of all the steep slopes, and then we had to cut the access road. Now, we've also included on our cost estimate the structures cost, which is unusual in land development. However, we're working for the owner, and we believe that the owner needs to have a good picture of exactly what they're getting themselves into. In addition to this, we also, when we were designing our site, we left a lot of room for, I guess, value engineering. Like you said, a lot of people, we need to take 10%, 10, 20%, whatever it is. This gives us an opportunity to take off because we have the restaurant, because we have extra amenities that the owner can give her if he needs to. So really, we feel that our design is well engineered. It gives back to the community, and it will bring the owner the revenue that they're looking for, and all for a price tag of just under $25 million.
All right, let me make sure it doesn't go into the next video. So barring hat fashion choices and whatnot, I think this was a pretty reasonable intro into the type of stuff that I'm going to be talking to you about today. So I want to sort of get into it. And I want to start off with an idea or a concept called a site inventory, okay? And the site inventory is, I guess, the best way of describing it is it would be step 1. In other words, if I'm going to put a nuclear power plant or an elementary school or what have you on a given site, it's probably a good idea to have a clear picture as to what's going on with that site. Is the site compatible for the project that's going to be placed there? Are there any concerns? Do I have any permitting requirements? Anything like that? So the easiest way to get into this is let's conduct ourselves a little thought experiment. So I have here this site. I have an image, an aerial view of a site. If we were going to develop on this site, tell me, what's some stuff you think we need to know? Just start spitting stuff out. Okay, how big it is. Okay, how many acres? Soil conditions. Now I want to go back to how big it is. How big is what? Wait, hold on, what did you say? And what would that? There you go. The boundaries. What piece is mine and what piece isn't. So we need a boundary survey. We need to know where the property corners are. Okay, that's an important point to make. And what did you say? Soil conditions. We need to know the substrata if we're going to design a foundation. What else? Are we in the floodplain? There you go. Topography is probably a good idea as well. Are we going to have excessive cut? Is there going to be some crazy retaining wall we've got to put on this site somewhere? what the site is zoned as. There you go. Are we going to put a nuclear power plant in a farmland? You know, right beside the elementary school. Yeah, that's the point I'm going to make here in a second. Anything else? I mean, what's been there before? That's a good idea. Are there any easements on the property? Is there a pipeline easement, a water easement, anything like that? Where the right-of-ways are. What about the vegetation? I mean, this looks pretty barren, but am I going to have some crazy trees I'm going to have to cut down for a given site? You see what I mean? This is the kind of stuff you need to think about when you're starting to develop a site. Given a tract of land, what are we doing with it? Okay? This is the type of stuff you need to think about. All right? So let's talk a little bit about some other stuff. I want to get into land use controls, or specifically zoning regulations. We've heard the term zoning. Okay? Now, what is zoning? Has anybody, I imagine you've heard of zoning. Anybody else heard of the concept of zoning before? Okay, all right. So if you've heard it, or at least have a general idea or what have you, we'll just sort of have it out. So zoning is the distribution or the division of land into particular zones based on some criteria. And usually you'll have things like a residential zone, commercial zone, industrial zone, government zone, what have you. And they're based on general principles. You know, segregation of land uses is beneficial. The idea that the zoning map itself is not subject to change, okay? And the idea is that there will be no reinterpretations of the law and what have you. Now, you start thinking about this a little bit, and then the last thing I want to do is get political, but I'm sure that there are some of you who are thinking, you know, wait a minute, what's going on with all this zoning? You telling me what I can and cannot do with my land? This is America. You know, what's next? You're going to come take my guns? You know. No, but in all seriousness, is this intending to tell a person what they can and cannot do with their land? And I guess the answer to that is yes and no, okay? This is a quote from a guy named Richard Babcock. He was a Chicago native lawyer. He literally wrote the book on zoning. He's one of the guys who helped draw up Chicago's zoning plan, their zoning ordinance. And he says in his book, The Zoning Game from the 60s, he says, there's little evidence in the history of land development in the United States in which the private decision maker, left to his own devices, can be trusted to act in the public interest. Now, zoning ordinances are not really intended to, prevent you from, if you want to build a house on your land, go ahead. But think about it like this. Do you think it would be a good idea to build a nuclear power plant next to an elementary school? I don't. Yeah, Charles Xavier's School for the Gifted or something like that, right? But in all seriousness, I mean, there is something to be said about having land suit a given purpose. If you grew up in a neighborhood, I mean, what's a neighborhood? It's a bunch of homes and houses, maybe a park, maybe an elementary school. There's not a prison right in the middle of most neighborhoods, Yes, sir.
So I don't know if this has to do with it, but over at Serena and Canova, everyone complains that there's like a pawn shop on every single corner. There really kind of is. Does that have to do with this?
It depends on the regulations there. I mean, if the zoning regulations permit it and they were permitted to do so, well, okay,
A lot of people say it's like it's directly related to the amount of crime. People think it feels like a pawn shop. That's not the point, but okay, so if people complain about it, can someone go and change the zoning rules or the ordinance or whatever?
I'm glad you mentioned something like that. We're going to get into that here in a second, okay? Now, this is just more of the history lesson. Zoning is not a new idea by any stretch of the imagination. You start going back into history, and there are zoning ordinances and zoning provisions that have gone back thousands of years, back to ancient Greece, back to England, after the Great Fire in London back in the 1600s, the idea of segregating land use for particular purposes, and then also even going into the Constitution and Bill of Rights, guaranteeing the right to own property. But again, land use controls are not meant to infringe upon that, not trying to take your land or your guns away or anything like that. That's not really what's going on. Okay, so One of the other things that's really important is what's called a comprehensive plan. I'm just curious, pop quiz on geography. This right here, this large body of water is Lake Erie. This is the Niagara River. Anybody know what city this is? Who said that? Buffalo. This is Buffalo, New York. There you go. Well, it's close to Canada. There you go. A comprehensive plan is a document for the future. It's meant to give the citizens of the city, as well as anybody coming in wanting to develop, the idea for the plan for the city. You know, for instance, think about it like this. If you were to hear that Huntington is getting a new restaurant, let's say a Benihana's or something like that. You know, you could, what's that? You never heard of Benihana's? It's a Japanese restaurant. Or a new Indian restaurant, or whatever. Or a Thai food restaurant. We could use a Thai food restaurant. There we go. All right, what restaurant are we missing? I don't know. Pick something. What's that? Popeyes. Okay, all right. Oh, I'm sitting here thinking of like Thai food and all the Popeyes. Popeyes. But think about it like this. Let's say that Huntington is getting a new Popeyes, okay? You said Huntington's getting a new Popeyes. You know where? Okay, now hold on. Let me go into that. He said put it on Route 60. Now, why do you say that? Route 60 seems like a reasonable place for a Popeyes, right? That area is about where you would find stuff like that. That's kind of the idea behind stuff like this. That if there's going to be a Popeyes, it's probably going to go here because that's about where all the restaurant type locations are. You see what I mean? That's kind of what's going on with the comprehensive plan. You know, it's meant to determine the pattern of growth for the future. Okay? Things about, and oh, go ahead.
There's a size relation, I guess. Like, as when you get so small, they're not, I don't think they're really zoning it too much in like a really small town. Are they? Maybe they are.
It depends. One thing, that's a good question. So do zoning regulations change depending upon the size of the town? And the answer is absolutely yes. We're going to talk about specific zoning regulations here in a second for Huntington. And I guarantee you some of those zoning regulations would be much different if you would go to, say, Manhattan. You know, I mean, would you agree that just parking regulations for development in Manhattan are going to be wholly different than here? Because the space is different. It's a different city. Different cities have different needs, okay? Now, if you go to some small one-stoplight town, maybe there aren't any zoning requirements. Or if there are, they're 2 pages, you know? It just depends. Each city's going to have its own specific needs, and that's a good point. All right, that's a very good point. And again, please, I mean, just stop me and say, Dr. Michelson, what the heck are you talking about? Because this is good stuff. I want you all to get some benefit out of this. So in addition, you'll see projection for the future for things like land uses, water, sewer, storm drainage. This is the comprehensive draft growth for Raleigh, North Carolina. So something similar. Something should be somewhat familiar. This is Huntington, West Virginia's future use map. And you can see different areas of, you know, what have you. We've got open space. We've got rural residential. We've got hills residential, traditional. We've got neighborhood centers. We've got light industrial, heavy industrial. We've got the university. All of these different zones and areas within Huntington. Now, if you go to the City of Huntington's website, you'll find a whole host of resources that I'm actually going to pull up here in a second. Actually, let me go ahead and start pulling some of this stuff up now. So I'm here on the City of Huntington's website, and if you go onto the City of Huntington's website, there'll be departments for police, fire, public works, and what have you. And there's also the planning and zoning department. Okay, now one of the things you'll find is the zoning ordinance. Now the zoning ordinance is a pretty massive document. You know, we're talking hundreds of pages, but it's basically meant to define how the City of Huntington is to be developed. Okay, now let me go to the table of contents. It's pretty long, but I think when you start breaking it down, it's not so bad. So for instance, you'll see things like zones R1 and R2 for residence districts. You'll see things like Zone R4 for two-family residence districts, high multifamily residence. And then we get to C1, neighborhood commercial district, C2, highway commercial district, I1, general industrial district. See what's going on? Okay, so to give you sort of a frame of reference, if you go onto the website, you'll also see a copy of the zoning map, which you can download through Google Earth. So here I've got Google Earth, and you can see there's the city of Huntington. And if I go and download this file, there it goes. So there's the zoning map for Huntington, and you can see what's happened is that it's gone in and colored different regions, okay? So let's see if we can find something that's familiar. Someone smart did that. Okay, now first up, okay, so here's, we'll take a wild guess and say that building's somewhat familiar, right? That's where we are right now. That's the new engineering building. Now, just curious, what is behind the engineering building on the side towards the river? I am recording this lecture, good sir. And in all seriousness, what is behind here? Steel mill. Okay, now watch this. If I click this area, look what pops up. This tells me the coordinates, but it also tells me zoning I1. Okay, what does I1 stand for? Industrial district. So that would make sense, right? So what's going on here with the engineering building? Well, if I go right here and click that zone, it tells me that this is zone C2, which is highway commercial district. Uh-oh. Highway commercial district. Ruh-oh, Raggy. So what's going on here? Well, what's that? This is America, that's what's going on. Well, ultimately what's going on is the rezoning process and the project approval process. We're going to get to that here in a second. All right, did you have a question? Okay. All right, before we get into that though, there's a couple terms and terminology I want to throw at you. One of them is floor area ratio. So you'll see this a lot in zoning documents, and we'll get to that here in a second. But floor area ratio is the gross floor area of all the buildings on the lot divided by the lot area. So if I took this lot and I built a building, okay, and I built that building such that the walls of that building literally hugged the property line, then this would be a property with a floor area ratio of 1. Does that make sense? I could also meet a floor area ratio of 1 by doing this. I could say, well, let's build on only 50% of the property, but let's put 2 stories. That's a floor area ratio of 1. Same thing over here, a 4-story building with 25% of the floor area. Does that make sense? Okay, that's important because certain zones will only allow certain maximum gross floor areas on their site. And it just depends, you know. Commercial zones are going to have different requirements than residential zones. And then Huntington is going to have different requirements than Cleveland, than Cincinnati, than Raleigh. Make sense? Well, it's all about population, geography, just how the city feels that it should be organized. There's a whole lot that goes into it. Yes, sir.
How does it affect, I guess, the regulations, like where like Marshall is state funded, is federal funded too?
Are you talking about Marshall University?
Yeah, like the zone for Marshall University, like how do the regulations play to that? Like who owns it, as opposed to like just me and you owning a piece of land versus the state or federal government owning something like that?
I guess, well, the best way that I can answer that is, you know, there are zoning requirements for if you're going to build a house, just as there are zoning requirements for Marshall. Now, I would imagine there's probably a little bit of negotiation that goes into that. I mean, Huntington, one of the centerpieces of Huntington, West Virginia is Marshall. So, so there is that. But beyond that, I don't really know what you're asking.
I guess you were asking what was behind this.
This has nothing to do with who owns what land. It's all about everybody conforming to the same regulations.
Yeah, but I'm saying, like, is there exceptions for those people? Like, you have to look behind this, and it's the steel thing. If Marshall...
West Virginia Steel.
Yeah. If Marshall wanted to, I guess I'm asking, they say, well, we need this land, this zone.
Okay, that's a good question. All right, first off, before that, so the question was if Marshall decided they needed this land. Okay, first off, that would be a negotiation that wouldn't have, that started off having nothing to do with Huntington, because Marshall and West Virginia Steel would have to come to an arrangement. You know what I mean? If West Virginia Steel said, no, I'm not selling you this land, then it doesn't really matter what the city says. You see what I mean? Now, if that happens, if heaven forbid, if West Virginia Steel said, okay, we can't make it anymore, we're shutting down, and then Marshall acquired that land, then they'd have to go through some processes to ensure that they could build, Beyond, and keep in mind, beyond just legal requirements, there's engineering requirements as well. They're right there near the river, so hydraulics, H&H, all that has to be handled as well. What's that? Environmental considerations. It's a steel mill, So all that needs to be taken care of. There was somebody raised their hand over here. Yes?
So does that matter, what building type it is either? Like if you're building a hotel, obviously it's going to have a pretty high floor to it.
Well, no,
Or is it just the zone?
let me say this. To answer your question, there is one monster of an issue in the world of land development that we haven't specifically talked about, and that's parking. And parking's a big deal that needs to be dealt with. So that needs to be assessed. Now, in terms of the height of a given building, there are some zoning districts that say you can only build a building so tall. For instance, if you try and develop in Washington, D.C., there's an ordinance that says you cannot build a building taller than what? Washington Monument. You cannot build a building taller than that. In fact, concrete flat slab construction is big in Washington, D.C., because the idea is that if they can take the superstructure depth and make it any shallower, then every 30 stories they might be able to get an extra one if they can take each superstructure and make it 3 or 4 inches shallower over 30, 40 stories. That's an extra floor. Extra floor means extra space to rent, which means more money for the developer. See what I mean? Yes, sir. Well, look, let me say the big driving factor, and this goes to what I was saying to him earlier, and this is going to become clear here in a second. The big driving factor is parking. You got to think about it like this. All right, let's say I can only build on so much of a site. Well, I could make that building 100 stories tall. But you got to understand, for every hotel room that I put in that hotel, I got to provide some parking for the folks at that hotel. So the more hotel rooms you provide, the more parking lots I got to provide. And sometimes it doesn't work out, in which case you have to provide structured parking. You got to put a parking garage on there. But parking garage, that's more money. So there's a trade-off, and there's a balance in there somewhere. And that's where the engineering comes into play. Make sense? Okay. Let me talk about a couple other things. Setback. Okay. This right here would never happen. Okay. Unless if you were talking about something like brownstones in Brooklyn, then I guess, yeah, that might happen there. But the idea of a setback that, you can build on this property, but there needs to be a little bit of a buffer between, your house and the person next door, And I'm sure that you've heard of situations where neighbors get into arguments over stuff like this, It happens. That's why you hear of things called grudge fences being put in between two people's property, because you like that term, grudge fence? Oh. So you get this. Okay. Not only are there side-to-side setbacks, but there can be setbacks from the road, setbacks from the rear, and that's just an idea, something you need to be aware of. A lot of times when you're designing a large commercial site and you're looking at commercial areas, usually there's a requirement that there be some percentage of open space, some greenery. Now there's one company that I can think of that never puts any green space at all in their parking lot. Anybody guess what I'm talking about? Walmart. And Walmart is kind of special, because as soon as Walmart comes into a town, everybody's going to be shopping there, everybody's going to be buying there. So it's funny how they just kind of do their thing, you know, and nobody says anything.
Depends on the area, though.
You're right, you're right. Sometimes it's not all,
Here they don't give a shit. But
always is a never. Yeah, always is a nevers. You're right, you're absolutely right, you're absolutely right. Oh. All right. Okay. Let's talk about the project approval process. Now, if you're building a hotel, or let's say if you're building a house in a residential district, then there's no zoning issues at all. You just have to make sure it's approved by the city planner, the city engineers, make sure that you're meeting all the codes and all that, and then that's it. That's it. Okay? But if you're building something outside the zone, then the process gets a little more involved. Usually there's some type of hearing. I mean, and you got to think about that. I mean, you know, if you're building some big thing in the middle of this city that's going to change the image of this city, then the people who live in that city probably have a right to say something about it. You know what I mean? So there's, you know, that whole "this is America" thing. It goes both ways, doesn't it? All right. So let's talk a little bit about the variance and the rezoning process. So, you know, to start off, it'll be reviewed by the city planning department. It'll be reviewed by the engineering departments. Usually there's a public hearing with the planning commission, and in some cases there's a public hearing before the whole city council as well. And they're going to check a number of things. Is it compatible with the existing area? Is it recommended in the comprehensive growth plan for the city? If not, why? Is it recommended by the planning and zoning committees after you've gone and met with them? If not, why? How does the public feel about it? You know, are the people who live in this neighborhood going to like the fact that there's a prison being put right next to people's houses?
This is like the Walmart case now, where it got approval before, but then that public group came back and found a loophole in this list of where.
Really? I actually know about that.
Yeah, like they approved it, like the city approved it, but then a private group got together and went through all this nonsense and found a loophole in it where they couldn't build that one.
Interesting. That's interesting. Huh. That's interesting. I didn't know that. But yeah, this stuff happens, and I'm going to, my next slide might clarify a couple things. So you also have to determine the impact on the community, relative success of your presentation. Are you good at getting the idea across? Okay? And here's what happens. Either you go through this hullabaloo and, yeah, go ahead, proceed with the project. You have our blessing. Or, yeah, with revisions. Make a few changes, might have to come back. Or it's just no. Come back and try again. Maybe you got to change some things. Maybe you find out the project isn't possible. Maybe you decide to, you know, strong arm some folks, bribe some folks. Ethical. That was more of a joke, but I will say this. Going back to as late as the late 80s and even the early 90s, who do you think controlled the reinforced concrete industry and the construction companies in New York? The mob. So, just saying.
Elimination, does that mean like murder?
Let's move on.
Have you dealt with that at all?
I have not. I haven't had to encounter those particular issues. No. But yeah, that was a little bit of humor, but hopefully that sort of illustrated some stuff. Now, the monster of site planning, parking. So yeah, parking's tough. All right, I had to find some pictures that I thought were hilarious. First off, this one. I'm trying to figure out how this even happened, you know, because it's, but the cars are faced so many different ways. It's like a Tetris puzzle. It's almost beautiful, you know. It's amazing. This one actually really did not make much sense to me because if you look, the spaces are 90-degree spaces, but they kind of just park wherever. Didn't really make much sense to me either. But. Yeah, they just decide what the heck of it. Yeah, the heck with it and just park wherever. In all seriousness, though, parking is one of the most difficult problems with the land development issue. In fact, if you're a site planner or you're an architect and you've got this project that you worked on and it came out beautiful, you know, and you're like, I got to submit this thing for an award or something. A lot of times they'll, you know, so here you go. Could you ignore the parking lot? Everything else is fine. And everything, you know, that it is a really tough aspect. And in my opinion, parking can make or break the functionality of a site. I don't know about you all, but for instance, the Walmart down here on US Route 60. I don't know about you, but that parking lot to me is just confusing. You know, as soon as you come in, you got that Y intersection and people can go this way and that way, and then you got like 3 or 4 different ways that you can come into the lot, and then they just threw a Taco Bell and a gas station there for the heck of it. You know, it's a mess, you know. But I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think that really impacts the functionality of that lot. It changes things.
It's completely undersized too.
Well, yeah. Walmart does have a way of just, you know, they just go till they run out of asphalt, you know. I've actually never been to St. Mary's. I've only been to... Yeah, that one is kind of complicated too. Yeah. Oh, yeah. What's that? Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. It's a little confusing, and you can't get from like one lot to the other. You have, yeah, it's confusing. Parking matters, and it's tough. Okay. So let's start off with a basic question. How big is a parking spot? You can look in your slides, but first off, the answer is it depends. It depends on where you're at, okay? If you want a rule of thumb, I go by 9 by 18. 9 foot wide by 18 foot long. But everywhere you go, the parking spots change a little bit, okay? Regular parking spaces go anywhere from 8 to 10 foot wide and about 18 to 20 foot long, okay? That's a regular space. What about an ADA space? What about a handicap space? It's not, no, it's not 9, okay? Usually a handicap space is wider, and it's usually around 10.5 feet, so. There's a lane in between. You are correct. You are correct with that, yeah. Okay. Now, here's another question. We've kind of been talking about this anyways, but for a given project, how many parking spaces are necessary? It depends. There you go. I mean, should we put maybe 3 parking spots at Walmart? You think that's enough? Maybe. There's a new parking garage over there, so. What's that? That's a good point. You know, the regulations you're talking about, that's going to become very clear here in a second, and actually how that's spelled out is not that far off. But in all seriousness, how many parking spaces are required? It depends. It depends on the regulations. It depends on what it is you're building. It also depends on the request of the developer. You know, usually what happens is most zoning requirements will list a minimum number of spaces. You must provide at least this many spaces. And then the developer says, no, I'd like more. Well, they want to pay for it, and they've got the land, and it meets the requirements. Go ahead, you know. These are some reasonable numbers for parking, and then I'm actually going to go into the Huntington Zoning Board zoning requirements, and I want to look at some of the units. Because some of the units I think are a little entertaining, but they make sense when you think about it. So start off, industrial. Usually you're providing about anywhere from half a space to 2 spaces per 1,000 foot of the site. Single, or how about this, convenience stores, 2 to 10 square foot, and what have you. Usually you actually don't really need that many. Shopping centers, how about this? 4 per 1,000 foot or maybe 6 per 1,000 foot. Usually actually what you see is about 3.97. So you can take the floor area and determine, you know, it's pretty basic math. We're going to do this later, but you can determine how many spaces you're going to need. Medical office or a dental office, maybe, you know, something like that. Maybe you need 4.5 to 10 spaces per 1,000 feet. You might think, well, that's a lot. Yeah, but medical office or dentist office isn't exactly that big. You know what I mean? Got to think about the scale of what we're talking about here. And I got to be honest with you, some of these units and things that you see are pretty funny.
Is there other regulation or any other like things to I guess think about some other than just floor area? Because depending on how many people are going to be in the spot.
Oh, you
have a really big freezer or something. You don't.
Oh, just wait. Just wait. Just wait. All right. So this is one of the articles in the Huntington Zoning Board is Article 1343, off-street parking, loading, and unloading regulations. Okay. So I'll start off with residential parking. All single-family detached or semi-detached residential units shall be provided with one off-street parking space for each 2 bedrooms. Okay. So it's determining the number of parking spaces based on how many bedrooms are in the house, right? Because that gives you an idea of how many people are going to be in the house. Make sense? But it goes much past that. Like, for instance, if,
I think the current law is 60. Well, maybe we'll get a parking spot.
yeah, but if there's 4 bedrooms in the house, it's probably not that, and if there's 4 people in the house, it's probably not that unreasonable to assume that they may have 2 cars. See? Just bear with me. Some of these are pretty interesting. If we get into commercial parking, for instance, let's look at number 7, bowling alleys. 3 parking spaces for each alley. Think about it. How many people are going to be at the bowling alley? It depends on how many lanes there are, right? The more lanes, the more people. The more people, the more necessary parking. Okay? Large item retail stores such as furniture and appliance stores, 1 space for each 600 square foot. Let's see, wholesaling or warehousing, 1 for each 600 square foot of building floor area, or 1 space per employee on the maximum shift, whichever is greater. General office, if you've got a small office, 4.5 spaces per 1,000 foot. If it's a little bit bigger, you can get by with 4 per 1,000 foot. If it's a really big office, 3.5 spaces per 1,000 foot. Gasoline service stations, at least 1 parking space for each 200 square feet of floor area. Hospitals, 1 parking space for each 3 beds. So, see what I mean? But see the units kind of make sense when you think about it. Now, whether or not they're always followed, you know. What's that? Where was it? Restaurants, taverns, and nightclubs. Taverns. 1 parking space for each 50 square feet of floor area for public use. So I don't think they're talking about the kitchen area. What's that? Oh, goodness. You really went there. I'll leave that one off the recording. Okay. Just food for thought. Okay. Lot forms. Okay. What's the difference between 2 pictures? Right parking versus angled parking. Now, from a design perspective, this actually matters, okay? Because these lanes are typically wider. You know, you need more space between a right parking lot, but you can allow traffic to go in both directions. Whereas for an angled lot, you know, you might be able to save on some space, but you've got to recognize that you're designing this for people to only drive down this way. Now, I know somebody says, oh, I know that I'm supposed to drive this way, and then I don't. And just between, it bugs the hell out of me when people do that. Yeah, there's angles all over the place. Yeah, yeah. I'll give you that one. Let's talk a little bit about layout schemes. Okay, so this would be a single lot on the left that's double loaded. Why is that there? Why is there that little nub on the right end of that parking lot? The one on the left. So you can turn around. You got to actually draw that out. I mean, if you're doing a site layout and you all are actually on MicroStation drawing this out, you need to put that there because somebody's going to go and build it. And if you don't put it there, then people can't back out.
How many people don't build those?
They should.
I can't tell you how many lots I've ruined.
No, I know. It bugs you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It sucks, you know. All right, here's a lot that's single loaded and you can loop through. Here we have a 2-bay lot. Notice we have the incorporation of green space. Okay. Notice how the difference between the lot on the left and the lot on the right is that there's 2 entrances. Here there's only 1 entrance. Okay. So you have to loop around. Okay. Just depends on what's going on. This is a little bit more of a complex lot, but notice how the lot's been configured to hug around the building, okay? Because the building is not a nice rectangular structure. Make sense? This stuff matters, okay? And this is the type of stuff you want to think of, okay? Here's another thing, pedestrian access, okay? A building, parking lot, might be a good idea to place some walks, some stairs, things like that, okay? Now, a walk is pretty straightforward, okay? Put construction joints every so often and you're good, okay? But there's these things called American Disability Act requirements. You have to provide access for those that are handicapped, okay? So how do you do that? Okay, first off, what is the slope on a handicap ramp? Anybody know that? Well, according to ADA, just depends, yeah. No, but according to ADA, anybody know? Well, let me say, usually it's 1 to 12, okay? It's usually a 1 to 12. But do you want somebody in a wheelchair just going like this for a constant ramp? Probably not. It's probably a good idea to provide some landings every so often, right? Usually you want to provide landings every 30 feet, okay? So you'll have an incline section and then flat, incline, flat, incline, flat. The same thing is the case, here's some different ramp schemes. You could have a ramp that curls around itself. You could have an angled ramp. Again, that you want to make sure you're meeting that 30-foot maximum length on the incline section. Now that's ramps. What about stairs? Okay, typically you're going to want to have a maximum elevation change of 6 feet. And then have a 3-foot wide landing, and then 6 feet, 3-foot wide landing. You want to provide landings every so often, okay? You all have probably seen these, little inclines on a sidewalk so that, a wheelchair can get up. This is just a reasonable detail for that. Anybody have any questions? It's pretty straightforward. On a drawing, it's a little more than copying and pasting. What's that? What, the stairs? I guess the owner or the zoning board or what have you. I'm arming you all today, I guess, with knowledge. Oh, all right. I want to look into a site layout problem, okay? So I've got this site and I've got an image of it sort of blown up a little bit. Here, you begin the distribution process. So let's say that we have a 5.07 acre parcel that you see right here. It's been zoned for commercial, office, and retail land use. So we're not going to have zoning issues with what we want to put on this site. Okay? Now, somebody wants to develop this and sell it for future use. We have a retail outlet that's going to occupy 10,000 square foot of ground floor space. So maybe like a Banana Republic or somebody like that is going to have, a store there. We're also going to have a bank that's going to come in and they're going to occupy 12,500 square foot of ground floor space. They've dictated that that will be on the ground floor. And then the remaining area, if we build more than that, is going to be speculative office space. So the idea is a law firm or what have you, accounting firm, anybody like that will come in and rent that as office space. Okay? Make sense? All right. Now, The developers also asked that only surface parking will be used, so no parking structures, okay? They don't want to spend the money. Sound good? All right. Now, here's some stuff from this region's local zoning requirements. So we'll say that this building is being built in Michelson County, all right? So here's Michelson County zoning requirements. All right. All right. We have, for retail space, parking is dictated to be one parking space per 300 square foot of ground floor area. For banks, the requirements are a little different. One parking space for 250 square foot of ground floor area, or gross floor area. I'm saying grounds, gross floor area. All right. Office space, one parking space for 350. And also, any commercial parking lot must have one ADA space for every 30 standard spaces. Okay? Sound good? Now, when it's all said and done, 10% of the site must be open space. Okay? So we cannot do the Walmart treatment. No one big pad of asphalt. Okay? Make sense? And then, in addition, a maximum floor area ratio of 70% is permitted. So 70% of the buildable site area can be used as floor space. Make sense? Now, how many square feet are in an acre? Pop quiz. We learned this in geomatics. What's that? 43,560. Should be a number that you drill into your noggin a little bit. All right. So, if we're going to do this job, what are we going to need? What info are we going to need? Help me out. Let's see if you all have been paying attention. 43,560. 1 acre is 43,560 square feet. And no, the answer isn't where the zoning officials are so we can intimidate them or bribe them. That's not the answer. What's that? You need an adult. You need to know what you're building. But is there anything else we need to know about this site? Let's talk. Probably need topography. I mean, we know the acreage, but we probably need to know things like what? I didn't think you had this. Goodness gracious. You're like, it's Wednesday at 5 o'clock, Dr. Michelson. We want to leave. Actually, what's that? 5:40? Is that when this class officially ends, or? Yeah. Oh, okay. We're actually doing pretty good. We're making really good time. All right. In order to create a successful site plan, we're going to need some information. We're going to need a survey of the site. We need to know specifically where the boundary lines are. We need to know the easements on the property. Are there any utility easements, gas line easements, electric easements, anything like that? Topography, we need to know what the slope is like. I mean, obviously, we got one big issue with this site. What's that? There's a creek running right through the middle of it, so we got to handle that, okay? Yes, sir. I was making you do some work. My goodness. It's the same thing here. My goodness. I know. I was trying to make you do some work. I wanted this stuff to be drilled into your head. What's that? So you all on the structures team? Is that? All right, so does this stuff make sense? The idea that you need a survey, you need to know the permitting requirements, which we kind of already do know that. The right-of-way, we need to know where the road is. Where are we proposing the entrance to be? Are we going to be, substantially impacting the traffic patterns there? How are we going to handle that? Utilities, where's the power going to come from? Where's the water going to come from? Make sense? Okay. Everybody good? I'm moving. Okay, so let's do a little bit of work here. Okay, so for the north parcel from the boundary survey, so we hired a surveying firm, they went out there and they surveyed the lot, and this is what we got. Okay, so we've got this creek, okay? This creek, or at least the usable area for this creek, takes up 1.06 acres. The remaining tracts, I'm saying here's the north parcel and here's the south parcel. The north parcel takes up 1.63 acres, or about 71,000 square feet. The south parcel takes up about 103,000 square feet. Okay, so the total buildable area on the site, if we take out the creek, is 174,420 square feet. Make sense? Okay, now, from zoning requirements, only 70% of that site is permitted for the building's gross floor area. Make sense? So we are only allowed, when it's all said and done, to have just under 122,000 square feet of floor area. Doesn't matter if the building is 2 stories tall or 850 stories tall. That's right there. We can only have that much floor area. Does that make sense? Sound good? Now, we have already promised some of that floor area out. We promised 12,500 square foot to the bank, and we promised 10,000 square foot to Banana Republic or whoever's coming in the retail outlet. Okay? So we have remaining left over 99,468 square feet. I'm just subtracting all that out, right? Now, if you're the developer, if you own this property, you want as much of that gross floor area to be put on the site as possible, because the more floor area that you can rent out, the more money that goes into your pocket as rent. Make sense? So you want to maximize that as much as you can. Okay? Now, since the developer wants to maximize that profit, let's conduct a thought experiment, and let's say that the rest of that is office area. So let's just say I build as much building as necessary, and let's just say it's all office space. So let's say I build a 4-story building, 5-story building, whatever, and I put 99,468 square feet of office space on that site. Make sense? Okay. There's a problem with that, and we're going to see that here in a second. But the big one is parking. Okay, so we have open space requirements though, and marginally developable sites on the area. But we'll talk about that here in a second. All right. So let's assume that there's 99,468 square foot of office space. Let's figure out how many spaces we would need. So the retail outlet is 10,000 square foot. Okay, we need 300 spaces per gross floor area, so 10,000 divided by 300 tells me I need 33.33 parking spaces. I can't do 0.33 parking spaces, so we round up and say we'll give Banana Republic 34 spaces. Make sense? The bank. The bank has a gross floor area of 12,500. We need 250, every 250 square foot of gross floor area, we need a space, so 12,500 divided by 250, we need 50 parking spaces for the bank. Make sense? Now the rest of that office space, we need a spot for every 350 square foot, so divide that out, comes out to 284.19, round it up and say 285. So summing all that, we need 369 parking spaces for this site. Sound good? Now, how many ADA spaces do we need? 1 per every 30. So if I take that and divide it by 30, what do I get? Like a little over 12? So probably 13 ADA spaces. Probably would be a good idea to place the ADA spaces as close to the building as possible. Yeah, no, yeah, you need to place your ADA spaces as close to the building. Well, I don't know that I've ever questioned it. I've never thought to myself in an engineering situation, why don't I put the ADA spaces down the back end of the creek? That's a mean question to ask. No, I do believe it's in the spec somewhere, but usually they're hugging the building anyway, so it's a non-issue. All right. Now, in this zoning district, each parking, or an average parking space is 9 foot by 18 foot, and that's 162 square feet. But I want to go back a little bit.
When you're doing the ADA, then spacing like the parking spaces, don't we need to include bigger?
Yeah, yeah, you're going to see what I'm talking about here in a second, because I'm going to account for that in a second. All right. let's take a look at this parking lot just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. Okay, each space is 9 foot by 18 foot, let's say. But I can't just take that parking lot and divide it by 9 by 18 to figure out, or multiply by 9 by 18 to figure out how big the lot needs to be. Because there's more space needed. I mean, you have to have a throughway. The cars have to be able to back up and get out, right? And plus, you've got ADA spaces. So a rule of thumb that I like to use is this. Let me go forward a little bit. Where was I? Okay, so I like to assume that each space requires 350 square foot. So that takes into account the size of the space, differing size spaces associated with zoning regulations and ADA and what have you, and also any navigable areas in the lot so that you can actually back up and get around in the lot. Okay? So if we need 369 spaces and we need 350 square foot per space, we need 129,000 square feet of parking. Okay? That's how much we need for parking. Okay? Now keep in mind, this is assuming that we have put all that office space there that we can. Okay? Here's the problem with that. Okay? We actually need to look at the site. Okay? First off, if we actually do a site inventory on the site, we find that there's this marginally developable area up here. It's really high slope. It's kind of marshy. I mean, you're not going to really do much with building a large structure in this little sliver of land right here. So it's really not very usable to the site. Okay? We've also got setbacks and things like that that we've got to deal with. So I'm saying that 15,000 square foot of this site is not developable. We can't really do much with it. Okay? We've also got open space requirements to consider, and we've got pedestrian access to consider. Okay? So if I go back to way back at the very beginning, this was my buildable site area on the site. And I say, well, 10% of that has got to be open space. So let's take 10% off that. Okay? Let's take off that 15,000 square foot marginally developable area. Okay? Now, when I do my buildings, I promised ground floor space to the bank and to the Banana Republic. So let's say that all the office space, let's be conservative, let's say all the office space is on the second, third, and fourth floor. It's not taking up ground space on the lot. So the building footprint, we're going to say, is only 22,500. Let's also then assume that we got to have sidewalks. We got to have walks. We got to have pedestrian circulation provided. So let's assume that's 10% of the building footprint. Okay? When it's all said and done, if I just take off all that, I only have 117,000 square foot on the site for parking. But if I were to build all that office space, I would need 129,000. Make sense? So the developer, they wanted as much office space as possible where they're not going to get the maximum. Make sense? We have to scale it back some, or they're putting a parking garage in. Make sense? All right. So we have to make some realistic adjustments to the site. Okay? First off, we don't need one big building, right? Why don't we have two buildings, one on either side? One on either side of the creek. Maybe put the bank on one side, the Banana Republic on the other, and put the office space above and below. Okay, so there's that. But yeah, we're going to have to scale back the development a little bit because of the parking requirements. So when it's all said and done, I propose that this is a reasonable site plan for this site. We've got a building on either side of the creek. We've got allocated parking on either side of the creek. We've got parking that hugs both buildings and is near both buildings for ADA requirements. We had to scale back the office space a little bit, but we ended up meeting all of the requirements. If we go through and actually do the math, hold on, yes, sir.
You showed it on there, the buildings were pretty daggone close to the creek. I'm assuming that plan takes into account floods.
That's a good question, and that would be an answer that you should be able to answer, or that would be a question that you all should be able to answer. I mean, are the geotech requirements fine, or are the H&H requirements fine? That's something that needs to be addressed. I would say that we can assume that that's been accounted for, but that's just us, assuming this is the final picture. I mean, you all would still need to go and check stuff like that if you were doing a site development project for your senior design. Does that make sense? But it's a good question to ask. All right, if we look at the north parcel, okay, so The north parcel is where we put the Banana Republic, so 10,000 square foot went there. We had the parking required for that. We said it's 34 spaces, so we're still maintaining this estimate. So that was about 11,900 square foot of space required for parking. The office area, what we ended up doing is, the ground floor was the retail and it was 10,000 square foot. We had a 10,000 square foot second floor and a 7,500 square foot third floor. So a total of 17,500 square foot of office space, and we ended up needing that much for parking as well. So the total constructed area on the north parcel was just under 57,000 square feet, and a similar calculation for the south parcel. I'm not going to run through everything. All I will say is that for the south parcel, we had the bank, and then we were able to do a second, third, and fourth floor of office space on that side. Remember, the south parcel was bigger, so we can put more there. Make sense? So, when it was all said and done, the total buildable area on the site was 174,000 square foot. We did that count, but we ended up constructing 162. So we made pretty good use of the site. We did a pretty good job, I think. For zoning, the allowable gross floor area was 121,000, or just shy of 122. We ended up going a little bit less. We ended up going with 77,500, but we needed to do that to ensure that we met all of our parking requirements. All right, make sense? Yes, sir.
This parking lot behind this building is very shitty. We all know. Bad parking, you're usually searching for parking 20 minutes. How did they decide that for all the parking? Because I know we have this parking lot, stadium, 2 garages, and we have 2 lots over near ACPS. How did they decide that? Like, this is good parking for whatever is built 15 years down the line.
It goes to what I was saying earlier. Remember that architect or that site planner that wants to submit their site plan for the award, and then they say, just don't pay attention to the parking. Yeah. Look, parking's tough. It's not easy. It really isn't. I mean, you got to look at it like this. Let's take this project. This project was a completely open, blank parcel that we could do whatever we wanted with, okay? So that being said, we should be able to configure a building and parking lot that makes sense because there's nothing there, okay? Now what you're talking about is building a massive engineering building on the other side of 3rd Avenue in the middle of Huntington, It's not as simple as that. This parking was used for Marshall, and then we put a building here. So they had to figure out what we were going to do because this was going to increase parking demand and it was going to take away the available parking spaces. And the answer was 6th Avenue parking garage. You see what I mean? And let me say this. If that idea doesn't appeal to you, I mean, I can understand that, but where else? You see what I mean? What's that?
Turns that into a parking garage right behind.
That's a good point, but would that have placed an undue demand right now? I mean, imagine if we, right now, how long does it take to build a parking garage, and then for all that time period, we're cutting out half the parking for Marshall? You see what I mean? You have to think about the realities of it, you know what I mean?
There used to be more parking here before they built this.
Oh, yeah. This building took away parking.
I guess you also got to think, like, they built the parking garage, and the parking passes, there's not that much difference in money, but most students don't want to pay for the garage pass. So there's another thing, is more students pay.
No, I know, and I don't want to get into the economics of that. There are some economic reasons for that, but yeah, I'll leave it at that. No, yeah, but that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about something else, and he's right, but there's a reason behind that, and yeah. What's that? Let me say this in all seriousness. If you think the parking is bad here, yeah, it is really bad there. And I know, 'cause I was there for 5 years, and it got worse every single year. I mean, yeah, you're right. I don't think that many freshmen bring their car to Morgantown, just because. Well, I'll say that's very possible. I didn't go there as an undergrad, so I don't know. So
You're allowed to, there's just certain lots for it.
really, that makes sense. I mean, my first year that I was there, I bought a parking pass because I thought I had to, and I was okay. I'll just do what they say, and it was like $300. And then afterwards, I said, "The heck with this! I'm not buying this anymore." And I ended up parking at the Coliseum. But in order to get a spot, I remember I had to show up at like 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, the parking is nowhere near any building that you need.
Oh no, yeah,
So you have to take a bus. My brother went there.
yeah. Are there any questions? Any questions at all? All right.
Where'd you go for undergrad?
I went to Bluefield. I went to Bluefield. So, any other questions? All right. I assume Huffman got the sign-in sheet and whatnot, so.